The perfect family is a beautiful, fragile thing, a glass ornament held together by hope and careful hands. And on the morning of December 15, 2015, in the quiet, snow-dusted suburb of Princeton, Minnesota, that ornament was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The call that came into the Mille Lacs County Sheriff's Office was frantic, breathless, a tremor of pure panic cutting through the Midwestern calm. A man's voice, strained and desperate, reported his wife missing, but this was no ordinary missing persons case. Brian Short's voice crackled over the line, telling dispatchers that his wife, 45-year-old Susan Short, was gone, and that something was horribly wrong. He'd woken up, he said, to an empty bed, a cold house, and a terrifying discovery on his kitchen counter. A single, blood-spattered note. It was a note that would tear the lid off a life of meticulously constructed normalcy and plunge investigators into a nightmare of hidden violence and a truth so dark it would chill a Minnesota winter to its core. To understand the profound shock of that December morning, you have to understand the image the Shorts presented to the world. Brian Short, 45, was a successful businessman, the president of a respected contracting firm. He was a church-going man, a pillar of the community, a father who coached his son's hockey team. He was known for his calm demeanor, his quiet authority, his seemingly unshakable stability. Susan Short was the vibrant heart of the family. A beloved occupational therapist, she was the kind of person who lit up a room, whose laughter was infectious, whose kindness was felt by all who knew her. Together, they lived in a beautiful, sprawling home on a wooded lot, a testament to their shared success. They were raising 3 children, 17-year-old Tanner, 15-year-old Cole, and their youngest, 9-year-old Madeline. From the outside, it was a picture of American prosperity and familial bliss. They were the family you envied, the one you pointed to and said, "See? They have it all figured out." But behind the pristine facade of their beige-sided home, behind the Christmas decorations and the family photos that adorned the walls, pressures were building. Financial strains, the kind they worked hard to conceal, were tightening like a vice. The global recession had hit Brian's business hard, and debts were mounting. The perfect life was becoming a performance, a desperate act sustained by smiles and secrets. The initial police response was swift. Deputies arrived at the large house on the 5200 block of 2nd Street and found Brian Short pacing, his face a mask of controlled anguish. He was coherent but visibly shaken as he laid out the facts of his morning. He'd awoken at his usual time, around 5:30 a.m. Susan wasn't beside him. He'd gone downstairs, called out for her, and found nothing but an eerie silence. Then he saw it, a note left on the kitchen counter. It was written in what appeared to be Susan's hand, but the message was bizarre, disjointed, and stained with what looked like blood. It spoke of Susan being unclean, of a sickness, and of her needing to be gone. It was less an explanation and more a cry of profound distress. Brian told the officers that Susan's purse, phone, and car were all still at the house. She had vanished into the cold, pre-dawn darkness with nothing but the clothes on her back. The immediate assumption, the natural human instinct, was concern for Susan's welfare. Was she having a mental health crisis? Had she wandered off, disoriented and hurt? A massive search was launched. K-9 units scoured the frozen property. Friends, family, and neighbors gathered, their faces etched with worry, their prayers whispered into the frosty air. But seasoned investigators, their instincts honed by years of seeing the worst of humanity, felt a cold dread settling in. Something about the scene felt off. The note, with its dramatic, almost theatrical language, felt staged. Brian's demeanor, while appropriately concerned, lacked a certain raw, visceral panic one might expect from a man whose wife of nearly 20 years had just disappeared under such horrifying circumstances. The investigation pivoted with the grim discovery later that same day. A family friend, searching a remote, snow-covered corner of the Shorts' 17-acre property, spotted something dark against the white. It was a tarp. And beneath that tarp, investigators found the body of Susan Short. She was still in her pajamas. She had been shot multiple times. The idyllic family home was now a homicide scene. The search for a missing woman was over. The hunt for her killer had begun, and all eyes, slowly and inevitably, turned to the grieving widower inside the house, the man who had reported her missing, the man who had found the note, the man who now had to be told that his wife's body had been discovered just a few hundred yards from their doorstep. Detectives watched him closely when they delivered the news. His reaction was noted, analyzed, and filed away. The pieces of the puzzle were no longer about finding Susan. They were about building a case. The blood-spattered note was immediately sent for analysis. The home was processed as a crime scene, and investigators began to peel back the layers of the Shorts' life, discovering the deep fissures in their seemingly perfect marriage. They found the crushing debt, the loans taken out against the business, the life insurance policies on Susan that totaled over $1.8 million. The motive was taking shape, a classic and chilling one: financial desperation. The following days were a masterclass in investigative pressure. While Brian Short played the part of the devastated husband, arranging a funeral and comforting his shell-shocked children, detectives were building a wall of evidence around him. They interviewed his employees, his friends, his family. They pulled his financial records, tracing a trail of desperation. They analyzed the note. While it was in Susan's handwriting, experts determined it was likely written under duress. The pen pressure was inconsistent, the phrasing unnatural. It was a coerced confession to a sickness that didn't exist, a fabricated narrative. But the most damning evidence was digital. Security camera footage from a nearby gas station, a few miles from the Short home, told a story Brian had not. In the early hours of the morning, around 3:30 a.m., hours before Brian claimed to have woken up and found his wife missing, the footage captured his black GMC pickup truck pulling in. Brian was driving, but he wasn't alone. In the passenger seat was a woman, and it wasn't Susan. This was the twist, the secret that shattered the community pillar's image. Brian Short had a girlfriend, a 26-year-old employee from his company. Their affair had been going on for months. When confronted, the girlfriend would reveal the truth. Brian had told her he was in the process of getting a divorce. He had promised her a future that evidently did not include Susan Short. The timeline was collapsing. His alibi was in tatters. The motive was now not just money, but freedom, a new life paid for with his wife's life insurance policy. Just 4 days after reporting his wife missing, Brian Short was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The calm, collected businessman was led away in handcuffs, the facade finally crumbling. The community was reeling. The children, now orphaned by their father's actions, were left in the care of relatives, their world utterly destroyed. The case seemed solid, a straight line from financial ruin and illicit affair to cold-blooded murder. But the true horror, the detail that would elevate this case from a tragic murder to something almost unspeakable, was yet to be revealed. It was the how. How does a man shoot his wife, the mother of his children, in the home they shared while their children slept? The answer would emerge during the investigation, a detail so cold and calculating it defied comprehension. Brian Short, the church-going father, the hockey coach, had not acted alone in the aftermath. He had an accomplice, not his girlfriend, his 17-year-old son, Tanner. The revelation sent a second, deeper shockwave through the case. Tanner, the eldest child, the hockey player, the all-American boy. According to the prosecution's theory, built on forensic evidence and eventually a confession, the murder was a family affair. The story they pieced together was this. In the early hours of that December morning, Brian Short had awakened his eldest son. He told Tanner that his mother was sick, that she was a threat to the family, that she had to be stopped. He handed the teenager the .22 caliber rifle, and he instructed his own son to go into the master bedroom and shoot his mother as she slept. Tanner, perhaps manipulated, perhaps terrified of his father, perhaps believing some warped version of this story, complied. He fired multiple times. Susan Short was killed in her bed. Then, father and son worked together to clean the scene. They stripped the blood-stained bedding. They carried Susan's body downstairs and hid it under the tarp outside. They worked together to write the note, forcing Susan's lifeless hand to hold the pen to create the blood spatter, to sell the story of her mental breakdown and disappearance. They were partners in the cover-up. This was the climax, the horrifying turning point that transformed the story from a domestic murder into a gothic tragedy of paternal manipulation and filial corruption. The perfect family was not just broken, it had been weaponized. The courtroom drama that followed was a tense, painful affair. Brian Short, initially pleading not guilty, eventually saw the mountain of evidence against him. The security footage, the financial records, the testimony of his girlfriend, and, most damningly, the evidence implicating his son. To avoid a trial that would force Tanner to testify and would likely result in a life sentence without parole, Brian Short changed his plea to guilty. He stood before the court and admitted to second-degree intentional murder. But even in his admission, he attempted to control the narrative. He accepted responsibility for planning the murder and for the cover-up, but he claimed he was the one who pulled the trigger. He was, in his final act, trying to protect his son. The court didn't buy it. The evidence pointed overwhelmingly to Tanner's involvement. In a heart-wrenching decision, the judge sentenced Brian Short to 40 years in prison. He would be an old man before he ever saw freedom again. But the case wasn't over. There was still the matter of the teenager, the son, the accomplice. Tanner Short was charged with second-degree murder. The legal system now had to grapple with a deeply uncomfortable question. Was he a cold-blooded killer, or a vulnerable teenager monstrously manipulated by the one man he was supposed to be able to trust above all others? In the end, the court leaned toward the latter. Tanner pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of aiding an offender after the fact. He was sentenced to a juvenile facility until his 21st birthday, his fate a tragic footnote to his father's crime. The two younger children, Cole and Madeline, were left to grow up in the shadow of an unthinkable betrayal, their family erased not by accident or illness, but by a calculated act of violence from within. The home on 2nd Street stands empty now, a silent monument to a lie that became a nightmare. The story of the Watts family murders by Brian Short is a stark and terrifying reminder that the darkest monsters are not the ones that hide in the shadows, but the ones that sit across from you at the breakfast table, who coach your hockey games, who smile for the Christmas card photo. It is a story about the violence that can fester beneath the surface of normalcy, and the devastating lengths to which a man will go to preserve his own crumbling illusion of control. He traded his family for a fantasy, and in doing so, he destroyed everything he claimed to be building. He sold his son a lie, and his son paid for it with his soul. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.